difficult decisions are difficult for a reason. Right? If they're easy, it's a non-issue.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because there are real positives if you go there or you stay here, and there are real negatives if you go there. And sometimes it's such a fine line. There's not a right decision. There's just the best decision you can make at that moment in time based on the information you have. But once you make the decision, it's your responsibility to make it the right decision.
Hello, and welcome to the Orchestrating Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca, Becca for short, and I'm a clarinetist who studied at the Eastman School of Music and then went to London to get my master's and PhD, both at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Having shifted pathways in my own life, I love hearing about the varied careers musicians can have and how they got there. And that's precisely what we're exploring in this podcast. As I sit down with music graduates to chat about their unique musical journeys, hear their hard-earned wisdom, and learn about how they're orchestrating their own careers. For today's episode, I had the great honor of chatting with Dean Jamal Rossi, the Joan and Martin Messinger Dean of the Eastman School of Music since 2014. Dean Rossi earned his bachelor's degrees in saxophone performance and music education from Ithaca College, his master's of music from the University of Michigan, and his Doctorate of Musical Arts from the Eastman School of Music. He was faced with his biggest professional decision when he decided to move away from a pathway of becoming a saxophone professor to a career in music administration, serving as Dean of the School of Music at the University of South Carolina and Assistant and Associate Dean of the Ithaca College School of Music before coming to Eastman. I loved learning more about Dean Rossi's story, from how he first started playing the saxophone to pivotal turning points in his career, which ultimately led him to his appointment as Dean of the Eastman School of Music. He shares his advice on making important decisions, especially when facing challenging crossroads in life, what the job of Dean looks like, including the responsibilities that come along with such a leadership role, and how he has taken concrete steps to balance and prioritize his family throughout his career. We also touched on what's coming up next for Dean Rossi now that he's retiring and entering a new chapter of his life. You're listening to Dean Rossi performing Vocalese, Opus 34, number 14 by Rachmaninoff under this intro. Stay tuned till the end of the episode to hear more. And now, let's get right into the interview. Welcome, Dean Rossi, to the Orchestrating Your Career podcast. It is such an honor to have you on, to get this chance to sit down and chat with you about your musical journey, especially coming off of the celebration that we just had a few days ago, recognizing your legacy as Dean of the Eastman School of Music and all the work that you've done here over the years. So it's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks so much. I've been looking forward to this.
I love the story of how I first met you because it's quite unusual and it actually took place on a boat. So it was my junior year and my first year working as a resident advisor at Eastman. You took all 12 of us RAs tubing on the lake for our training week. And so this involved you, Dean Rossi, steering the boat and small groups of us RAs hanging on to these big inner tubes that were connected to this boat and bouncing along behind it. And later on, you even got in on the action and got on the tubes with us. That was such a fun experience. And I think just one example of how you've taken extra time to spend time with students and to really get to know us as students. I know that has made such an impact on me. I know that you've shown that same generosity and support and guidance over the years for countless others. So cannot thank you enough for your service to this school and this community.
Thank you. I mean, that was very kind of you to say that. I didn't realize that was the first time we met, but I remember the experience very well. And I cannot remember the name of the alumni. So if you're out there, maybe you're watching, but I remember I did get on the tube and the student, we must have hit a wave and he came down and he bit me.
Yes. I remember, yes. Conrad Smith. Yeah, infamous story that came out of that.
I might still have tooth marks.
It was so much fun, and I think just really special for us as students to get to spend that time with you. And there are a couple other faculty members there on the trip with us, and yeah, just such a testament that you would take that time to hang out with us and get on the tube.
Super fun.
Well, you have been serving the Eastman community for almost 20 years for the last 2 decades, as dean for the last 10 years, and then before that, and I'll see if I can get this right, as executive associate dean, interim dean, and acting dean.
It was actually hired as deputy dean.
Deputy dean. Okay, another one in the mix.
I wanted a star to come with that.
Like a sheriff.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. We'll work on that.
All right.
I am super excited to get to dig into your journey and hear how you've come from first double majoring in saxophone performance and music education to holding position as dean. But before we get there, I would love for you to start off by sharing your musical beginnings. Could you share how you first got introduced to classical music and why the saxophone?
Wow. How much time do we have? Well, let's see. I actually think I've got a pretty interesting beginning story because, let's see, I was growing up in the early 60s. And this was before parents were really involved in sort of Suzuki type education.
Yeah.
Right? It was very much teacher and student. So my mother said to my dad, my father worked for U.S. Steel. He was just a steel worker and a very blue collar family. But I think she said something like, honey, we should get a piano for the kids.
Oh.
Because they should learn music. So they, in fact, bought a piano, and a friend of my dad's from the mill came to our house to give my sister piano lessons. She was 8 at the time, and I was 5. And I clearly remember my mother would just go around the corner from where the piano was located. And she had one of those Radio Shack tape recorders, cassette recorders, where you plus play and record. And she would record the lesson, and she'd be listening, and she'd take notes throughout the whole lesson. After Mr. Hammond left our house, she went and taught herself to make sure she knew what he said and to coach my sister during the week. And a day or two later, she would teach me. So we were getting 3 lessons for the price of 1. So
Wow.
my mom was entrepreneurial.
Yes.
But I think without knowing it, she was also a pretty smart educator, right? You listen, you absorb it, you apply it, and then you explain it. It's a good way to learn something. So I started playing piano at 5. I loved it from the first moment. My sister did not. So within a few months, Mr. Hammond was coming to the house to teach me because I really enjoyed it. So that's where that started. And then around 3rd grade, I think she said to my father something like, honey, he'll never be in a band playing piano. So, would you like to play an instrument? I have no idea why, but I knew I wanted to play the saxophone. And I think it's because a woman down the street had a saxophone, and I thought it was a cool instrument. And, at 3rd grade, I wasn't listening to a ton of music or anything. Yeah. And so we went to the music store. And at that time, there was this theory that said, well, if you want to play saxophone, you should learn to play clarinet first. No offense to clarinetists,
None
of course. But I really did not want to play clarinet.
Fair enough.
I was not happy coming home with this instrument, and I really didn't enjoy it. So I was playing it for months, but I knew what I wanted to play was the saxophone. So this is a true story. I remember, I'm practicing away and squeaking, and the way this was set up was I was at my bed and I had my Bundy clarinet case and my music in it, and I'm playing and I'm squeaking, and I went whack.
Oh, no.
and I broke the clarinet right at the tendon. So then I had to explain this to my parents that I dropped the clarinet. And oh gosh, look what happened. So we went back to a store and we got a saxophone. And I loved it from the minute that I started. Was fortunate I was able to sort of join the 4th grade band in 3rd grade. So I felt like a big deal.
Yeah.
So another person from my class and I were doing that. And, I just always enjoyed it. There's something very physical about playing. There's something very rewarding about it. And I love the sound of it. So that was it. And so I played piano through high school, but I just fell in love with jazz and with saxophone. And what I really fell in love with was jazz. So when I was in high school, that's what I was doing. I was listening to jazz all the time.
Yeah.
And I joke that music skipped a generation in my family.
Huh.
So I was listening to the music of, Count Basie and Duke Ellington and all the big bands. And I loved Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. Well, those were people who were making music when my dad was a young man. He didn't listen to any of that. I was not really into the popular music of the 60s and 70s. And so later, when my son was playing music, he was really into the music of the 60s and 70s. So, it just sort of somehow we skipped generations.
Yeah, that's funny.
Music study.
Yeah. So then how did you decide that you wanted to pursue music professionally? Was there a particular experience or moment that made you want to go study it?
Yeah, so I grew up outside of Philadelphia. It was a big school. I think I had about 1,200 students in my graduating class. So music was very big, and I loved it. We had a big marching band, and we would play Philadelphia Eagles games, and we did marching band competitions and stuff. It was a big band. It was like 11 buses when we went someplace.
Oh wow!
But the main thing was the jazz ensemble, and it was pretty intense. We rehearsed 5 days a week from 4 to 6 every day.
Wow!
In the summer, there's a summer jazz program, and so I was just devoted to that. And not unlike a lot of students, my high school band director was probably the most influential figure in my life. And I loved him, and I could really see myself doing this, right? Yeah. Teaching others and being a high school band teacher. So that's, really what I went to school for. Is something about that visceral feeling of making music that I just loved. So my goal was to go to school to be a high school band director. I believed in music education. I wanted to have a role in that. But in the back of my mind, the people I was also listening to were a lot of LA studio musicians. Trombonist Bill Watrous, saxophonist Tom Scott, these people who were playing incredible jazz on their recordings, but really making their livings in the studio. And I thought, well, boy, maybe I could do that. And so that was the goal when I went to school.
Yeah. So then you went to Ithaca College and did the double major with music education and saxophone performance. Why did you decide to do a double major if your goal was to become a band director? Had you considered just focusing on music education, or did you always want to have the performance?
No, I started as a music education major.
Oh, okay.
And my teacher, who was one of the 2 or 3 most influential people in my life as a whole, Steve Mock, who I always tell students when they go to music school, you're going to have a teacher for 4 years, but you're going to have a mentor and friend for decades. And Steve and I have been close friends now for more than 40 years. So he saw something in me that I don't think I saw, and he encouraged me to audition for a performance degree. At the time, it was a 4.5-year program, so you can get both degrees. You had mentioned earlier about classical music. My parents didn't really listen to a lot of music. The music they listened to I still love, which was a lot of American Songbook and Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby and Andy Williams. And that's what was playing in my house. But Steve Mock introduced me to classical saxophone, which I didn't even know was a thing. I had never heard of it. And so, I went to school thinking I was some hot jazz player until you get around real jazz players.
Yeah.
And then you realize, I can make the changes, but I'm not really, I don't think in the same way that a real jazz player and an improviser thinks on a whole different level of creativity.
Yeah.
And I really fell in love with classical saxophone because it fit my personality more, which was trying to master something. Like I've always loved practicing. I love trying to master a phrase and turn it just right. Which that sort of fit more than I love jazz, I love improvisation, but that practicing that wasn't as fulfilling to me as trying to really push myself and master these various techniques. So I fell in love with that, and that was sort of my first exposure to classical music. And then I learned, there's like a lot more than just classical saxophone, and just loved it all.
Did your career goals change at all throughout that time in your undergraduate when you then took on this performance major? Were you still thinking when you graduated that you would go into music education, or had you brought more of a performance aspect into what you wanted to do with your career?
Yeah, I tried to apply myself and was having some success as a player. And, my teacher had encouraged me to think about getting a master's degree in saxophone performance. And at the time, there were 3 sort of major saxophone schools: University of Michigan, Indiana University, and Northwestern. There were sort of 3 teachers who were quite legendary at the time. I very much was drawn toward the sound and the musicality and the style of playing of Donald Cinta in Michigan. So right from my undergraduate degree, I did graduate in December. I actually, I graduated on a Friday. Monday, I started a teaching job as a maternity leave. So, I had that job for the spring semester, but then went right on to Michigan for the master's. But I was thinking, again, looking at what my teacher was doing, a very high level of playing. During that time, I discovered the joy of playing chamber music and saxophone quartets, and that was a great experience for me. So I thought, I could see myself actually being at the collegiate level, being a saxophone professor.
Okay.
And commissioning new works, premiering new works, trying to push the envelope a bit. And that really, my career goals shifted to saying, no, I want to try and just become as outstanding of a saxophonist as I can.
So is that then what prompted you to go on to do a doctorate, the desire to teach at a collegiate level?
Absolutely. I mean, I think to get a Doctorate of Musical Arts, especially in saxophone, it is really the necessary element for collegiate level teaching.
Yeah.
Especially if you want sort of a long-term and tenure and promotion. I mean, there's some folks out there who don't have that terminal degree. But at that time, especially, this would have been early to mid-'80s, it was clear that institutions were requiring the terminal degree. But it wasn't my plan to go right on to a doctorate.
Okay.
I'll tell you, I actually, in hindsight, and it wasn't even looking back years, it was looking back weeks, almost regretted going right on to my master's degree.
Oh, why?
I was in school with people who had been out of school. And I realized they had a much keener sense of what they needed to get out of this degree. And even, students here, if they're going on to a master's degree, I think that's terrific. I encourage them. And when our new master's students come here, I strongly urge them to not let this be super senior year. It really should be a completely different experience.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of those things I realized when I got there. One, I just wish I had taken a break for a little bit of air. And I remember one clarinetist in particular who had been out for a number of years, and he came back and he was super focused on what he needed. And I thought, that came from experience that I didn't have. So my goal was to take several years, like 3 years was my thought, between degrees.
Yeah.
I graduated Michigan. I thought the world was waiting for me.
Yeah.
They were just holding their breath, waiting for me to graduate, and then they'd be knocking down the doors with college job positions. Well, I didn't get a job. And that's a learning experience. It hurt. My best friend got a job. Some others, got some collegiate positions, and I didn't. So what to do? Well, I got a teaching position, which was fine, because I always thought, I love teaching, and I thought, well, maybe that's where I'm supposed to be. I took a middle school teaching position about an hour south of Rochester, in a tiny little town called Wayland. It was another maternity leave position, but that music department was a husband and wife, and they said, she's not coming back. This is our 3rd child. we want her to be home, and he was the high school music teacher, and this is a middle school position. So the whole time it was like, that you're doing great. Hopefully you'll stay on, and I wanted to stay on. But sort of in mid to late March, they decided they couldn't afford it. They needed for her to come back. And so that was pretty tricky, because what to do? Do I try and get another teaching position now? I just moved, or go back for a doctorate degree? I called my teacher at Michigan. He said, would love to have you come back, but I've already awarded the teaching assistantship. Called another professor who is somebody I always admired, and it's the same thing. He said, it'd be great, but, it's late. Deadlines are December 1. This is like March 31st. And I called here to Ray Ricker, somebody I had met but didn't know well. And he said, well, let me see what I can do. And in fact, a day or two later, he called back and had put together a package for me to be able to come. And it was fate, I guess, because Eastman wasn't really the place I was thinking of going, but he had put this package together that would make it affordable.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll tell you one other thing, and then I'll stop rambling on here
please,
about this.
It's great.
And that is not getting that college position was probably one of the best things that ever happened for me, because my wife and I had just gotten married the summer before that. So had I gotten a college position, I have no doubt I would have put 150% into it. There's no end to what you can do. The middle school position really was a job that ended at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I tried to do excellent work, but it was maybe the best investment in our marriage that I wouldn't have had had I gotten right into a college position.
Yeah.
So I am forever grateful for that year in Wayland. It felt like that was an investment in our marriage, and we've now been married 42 years. So, thank you, Wayland.
Yes. That's amazing. And I love your perspective on that in hindsight, of being able to see that and recognize that, even if things aren't turning out how you imagine them and how you might want them to at the time, that they do end up working out for what's best for you at that time.
I think that's a lot of life. Is we can't really appreciate the moment, or appreciate what this moment means in a whole lifetime.
Yeah.
At that time, it really is part of a puzzle that one puts together, and that's our lives.
Yes.
So it's hard to see the whole picture.
Yeah, I love that, and I think really important perspective to keep in mind, especially if you're in the midst of those career turning points.
Yeah.
So thinking about when you're transitioning then out of doctorate into the career, how did you get your first jobs? Did you feel like your doctoral experience was giving you some of that experience of getting into the real world and making that transition, or how did that work?
At the time when I was doing the doctorate here, we didn't have an Institute for Music Leadership. But I did take the course, The Business of Music with Ray Wright, which is a really great course. But the doctorate, I think, just enabled one to really become, quote, an expert at their instrument and their craft. But it wasn't so focused on preparing one for even collegiate teaching. And so I'll try and give you an example of that. So my first job after Eastman, I hadn't completed my degree yet. I had finished 2 years, was a sabbatical replacement for one of my really good friends, the fellow who got a job after our master's and I didn't.
Gotcha.
So he was going back for his doctorate, and he needed a year in residence. So he asked me if I would teach, and that was at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. And that was great. He had built a fantastic program, and I went down there and taught classical saxophone and jazz, and was doing jazz ensembles and things like that. And but I always knew that was a 1-year gig.
Yeah.
Right. So then I was applying for jobs. There are never a lot of saxophone jobs.
Yeah.
I don't know how many full-time saxophone professors there are. in the country, but certainly less than 50. There are a lot who do a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So in fact, even when getting my degree, I knew the majority of jobs weren't just teaching saxophone. So I really focused on trying to get a musicology minor, meaning I just took all the musicology courses I could, because I thought, well, that'll give me a smaller school where you could teach saxophone and something else. You know, I would have that ability. So when I was at UNCW, the jobs that were available were again sabbatic replacements or things like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've done this a couple of times, and it is a 1-year commitment. And, you know, it's not just me, it's my wife, and we want to start a family.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
the one full-time job that was open, it might have been the only job that was open that year, was in Aberdeen, South Dakota. I went and interviewed, and, you know, I believe me, I never thought of going to South Dakota before. But, you know, I met some just really lovely people and had a good time. And I just thought, I want my own program where I can make my own mistakes, as opposed to just trying to not make mistakes with somebody else's program.
Yeah.
So that's how I got there. The idea that the degree prepare me for that job, not really. It was the public school teaching that prepared me. That job was teaching woodwinds, jazz ensemble, and we had a jazz combo, theory, woodwind repair, and assistant marching band director. Doctorate required. Now, there's no doctorate degree in the world that prepares one to do all those things.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's different today in that, you know, I think many schools, and Eastman as well, really try to focus on pedagogy. How do you teach this?
Yeah.
Again, things like the IML, where we have many courses and things like web design and copyright law and publishing and all kind of things.
Yeah.
That just wasn't available at the time. Yeah.
So in South Dakota,
Yeah.
then how did you then move into the more administrative side of music, and what was part of the decision process of wanting to make that move?
Yeah. I didn't.
Okay.
It was never a goal. Although I will tell you, when I was a student at Eastman, the assistant director who really oversaw much of the school's operations and was the advisor for the graduate students was a fellow named John Naberg, one of the smartest men I've ever known. I took the city bus into Rochester every morning, and I would get to school around 7:55. And so, you know, the main hall's not all that busy at 7:55.
Yeah. And
I'd walk down, and I could hear Dr. Engberg practicing his cello in what is now John Haynes' office. And I had so much respect for him. He was my advisor, and I thought, well, maybe I could do that someday. But that was not something I was aspiring to. So I was at South Dakota. How did I get into administration? I think I was the last person standing. It was a small department. It was only like 13 or 14 faculty members. And some folks had been chair, and some people, perhaps the dean felt, couldn't do the chair. And so in my third year, I ended up as the department chair. Something in hindsight, again, I would never, ever advise a young faculty member, a non-tenured faculty member, to be a department chair.
Yeah.
I wasn't qualified to supervise faculty members who have been teaching for 25 years or to evaluate their work, or, you know, I think I was really the last person standing. But it was also, we had to do an NASM reaccreditation visit. So I think what he was really looking for was somebody who perhaps could lead that effort. So that was the first time I wrote a self-study.
Okay.
And I think, again, he was somebody, Lon Sweet was the dean, and I think he saw an ability that perhaps I had that I didn't fully appreciate. So I took that on.
That was just department chair.
Department chair, because it was a department of music.
Okay.
And it was part of a school of fine arts.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So then you moved on to become was it assistant dean at Ithaca? So how did that happen? So in my second year I was at South Dakota for 3 years. And let's see, I'll tell you two things about that. One was it was just fabulous.
I love that school. I love the people. I love the town.
Mm.
And I think if that whole town and school had been in the middle of Pennsylvania, I'd probably still be there.
Mm.
One of the big problems was none of our family members could come to us without spending a night someplace. They would get snowed over someplace or miss a connection. And I also thought, man, here I am in South Dakota. My friends are in LA and New York and doing all this cool stuff. And so, a little antsy. My second year, the dean of Ithaca College, Art Ostrander, called me because they had a position of director of admissions available.
Mm.
And was I interested? And I just wasn't. But again, the chance to go back to your alma mater, the school I really loved, really cared about. But that wasn't a position that had any appeal to me because I don't know what that position leads to later. Mm. So, okay. The next year he called and he said the assistant dean position was open. Would be interested. And this is a man I just had so much respect for. He was here on Friday for the ceremony. Really has been the major influence and mentor in my life. So that was truly the biggest professional decision I've ever had to make.
Oh, wow.
Because I was on the route of being a professor. I was getting my name out as a saxophonist in the saxophone community. I was involved in the Saxophone Alliance and doing things like that. And I thought, wow, do I want to become full-time administration? Ultimately, I made the decision to do that for a couple of reasons. And one was a chance to work at a school I really think is an exceptional school and someplace I cared about, to work with art, and also to get back near family. I'm from Philadelphia. My wife's from Rochester. It was a chance to do that. We had a young son at that point who, was growing up without aunts and uncles and grandparents nearby. So that was the big reason to say yes. But in the negotiation, I also asked Art, I said, there's a lot I want to accomplish on saxophone as a performer, and I have some things I want to write. And he could not have been more supportive of letting me do that. So those were actually really fruitful years as a musician, in that I was still doing a lot of playing.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Could you share any more about your time at Ithaca? How was that transition period of moving from being more in the performance world to the administration side of the music world?
Gosh, it's a long time ago. But I remember that was the first time I really felt like a they. And that, there is sometimes a divide between we and they. And that somehow you were on the other side of things. And I was thinking, wait a second. I love music. I am a musician. I love students and teaching, and I love the mission of higher education. But now suddenly you're something other than that. I think that's a transition anybody who moves from, and my story isn't that unique. I mean, we have a leadership conference here in the summer, and a lot of folks are faculty who are becoming department chairs, and perhaps they're getting more opportunities. So it's not unusual to move from the faculty track into administration.
Yeah.
But that is an adjustment one has to make. Is you're not necessarily one of the faculty anymore, and some faculty members view you with some suspect. And that was interesting.
Yeah.
I also learned I play in a saxophone quartet with my saxophone teacher now. He never was sort of probing for information. He was just too classy and too professional. But we just had an agreement that said we will never talk about school during the quartet.
Okay.
And I've had 2 other quartets at universities, and the same thing. This is time just to be friends and to make music. We're not talking about the rest of the stuff going on. And so that really helped allow me to just be myself and be able to make music.
Yeah. It was amazing to be here for the celebration of you and your tenure that was just a few days ago on Friday. And so many people gave really moving tributes about you and all of the work and contribution that you've made to Eastman. And Dr. Donna Fox gave an amazing speech. And I hadn't realized until she shared it in this speech that you actually had been offered a position at Eastman that you had to turn down. And then I read a write-up about you in the Eastman Notes. In Eastman Notes, and just a lot about your journey and your story, and then realized that actually you had to turn down a role here twice.
I did.
One time because you had made a commitment to another institution to work there already, and then the second time because your son was going into his final year in high school and you didn't want to uproot your family at that time. And so I'm really curious about how you navigated those experiences, and if you have advice for anyone who might face a similar crossroads in their career of how you navigate that.
Yeah, that's a good question. In some ways, it's very individual in terms of who you are.
Of course, yeah.
What are the things you value in life? What are your goals in life? So the most important thing in my life is my family.
Yeah.
I love my job. I've always worked hard. I've always enjoyed my work. And I must say, being the dean of the Eastman School of Music is maybe the best gig in all of music. I love being the dean. It's still second to my family for me. We had this opportunity to, Jim Underkoffler was the director and dean at the time. And again, I got to know him because Ithaca is only 2 hours away. So we got to know each other during my Ithaca years. I was there 11 years. And I just had so much respect for him. And again, the chance to work with him and to be part of that team was like, man, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
But the timing just wasn't right for us, and that it would have been my son's senior year. And the two options were that I would move my family up here, or they would stay and I would come up here and commute somehow. And again, for some people that could work very well. I know people who have done that. I'm sure it's a huge sacrifice. I just know for me, it would not have worked. And that I wouldn't have been happy. If I'm not happy, I'm not going to do my best work here, and the school deserves people to do their best.
Yeah.
So I just thought that's too big of a sacrifice for something that I want, but knowing what your priorities are, I think helps you navigate those things. The other thing I'd say I don't know if I developed a philosophy, but I've adopted a philosophy. Going back to that decision about going into administration or not, when I left Ithaca, I actually had a couple of options. So which one to take?
Yeah.
Or that choice to come here is that difficult decisions are difficult for a reason. Right? If they're easy, it's a non-issue.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because there are real positives if you go there or you stay here, and there are real negatives if you go there. And sometimes it's such a fine line. There's not a right decision. There's just the best decision you can make at that moment in time based on the information you have. But once you make the decision, it's your responsibility to make it the right decision. You've made it. There's no looking back. You now invest everything into making that a good decision. Because if you don't, the only person who suffers is you. It's not like you could, oh, gee, I wish I had stayed there. Well, you didn't. So don't fret. Just, you made the decision, jump in. And I find sometimes people are sort of hesitant and they're trying to keep their foot in both worlds.
Yeah.
And I think that's really hard because you're not really fully present where you need to be.
Yeah.
So again, for me, it's, as dean, you make a lot of decisions. Hopefully, you hit more of them right than wrong.
Yeah.
But the goal is you make the best decision you can based on the information you have at the moment. And you may find out, wasn't the right decision, But, like I say, I always try and say, we made that decision, we have to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such helpful advice. I felt for me, I had like a light bulb moment when you said, once you make the decision, you do everything you can to make it the right decision. Because it's very intentional, and that's very being proactive to not get caught up in what if I had done that differently, or what if something like this had gone differently. No, you're just looking forward and you're saying, I'm going to make this the right decision, or do everything in your power to do that. And I think that's really important. And I think especially, as you said, as Dean, you've had to make a lot of decisions. I think being able to come at decision making with that perspective and that mindset must help a lot.
It helps me. Like I say, I know that, believe me, I know every decision I make may not have been the right decision, but in my heart, I slept at night. I sleep at night knowing I did my best to make my best decision.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes you don't know, you just don't know how that will play out.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's even that, as you just said, it's not just making the decision. You then have to commit to it.
Yeah.
You have to make it work. And even then, sometimes it can't.
Yeah.
But that's sort of life. That's just what it is.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate how you broke down how you approach this decision process, and just the importance and priority that you've put on family. And I think that was evident in a lot of the remarks that I was hearing on Friday of how people are talking about you, evident also in just, our conversation now, and how you're saying that investment that you're able to make in your marriage, even at the beginning, has played such a big part in your life and that relationship. And I think just to see how somebody is still able to prioritize that in the midst of taking on these really big roles and these jobs that are incredibly intensive and take a lot of time, but how you're still able to make that balance in your life and prioritize that in your life is really important. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. People often ask about work-life balance, right? We hear that all the time. And I'm not even sure such a thing actually exists. I think people have to find out what they want. These jobs, like this is a really important job. Yeah. It's still a job. There's life, and then there's a job. Yeah. Right? So where do you put that in those things? And so again, work-life balance for me might be very different than for you. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you one quick example. I learned this at Ithaca, and I applied it at South Carolina, and I applied it here. That said, where are we going to live? I want to live between 15 and 20 minutes away from school. So, I remember coming here actually and meeting with realtors, but then I would drive it to those areas because it wasn't within that. I did not want to be 3 minutes away because I learned, when we learn these things about ourselves, I need a little decompression time between leaving work and getting home, because if I was 3 minutes away, I would walk in hot. Right? No, a little decompression time. But 20 minutes was the outlier for me because, I tried as much as possible every night to go home for dinner and then turn around and come back for concerts. And 25 minutes or a half hour, it would be too easy to say, I'm going to stay on. Because you get, you don't walk out at 5. Yeah. And if something comes up and suddenly if it's 6, it's like, it's not going to be worth it. But I thought that 20-minute mark, I can get home, even if it's a quick dinner. I can see my kids. I could have that every night. So we have that constant and come back. So that was what was important to me. That may not be what is right for the next person. The next person may not have kids, or they find a different way to do that. But I think everybody has to figure that one out for themselves. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. And I think it's really helpful that you shared how it looks for you, because if somebody is interested in having a family and maybe thinking about how that could work in their future careers, I think it's always helpful to see how other people have been able to manage it for themselves, even though it'll look unique for every person. Yeah. So I'm curious then, coming to your time here as Dean at Eastman. So you came on first as
you said deputy
dean.
Very cool. And then held these various dean positions to then become Dean of Eastman. Could you share some of what that position even involves, maybe a little bit at the different levels? Because I feel like most people would know what the dean of an institution is, but I don't have, and I feel like maybe a lot of students don't have a good idea of what that actually looks like day to day, what the responsibilities and what makes up being a dean of an institution, especially one like the Eastman School of Music, which is one of the top leading schools in the world. So could you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Wow. I don't know. People sometimes say, what do you do? And I joke, whatever my assistant tells me, whatever's on my calendar.
Yeah.
And the calendar often is quite intense. And sometimes it's like, oh, I can't believe it's so busy. But then I have to stop and say, there's nothing on there I didn't ask for.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's on us. So what's the job? That's really hard to say. At the end of the day, I believe the dean's responsible for everything. Or a leader is responsible for everything. Harry Truman used to have this little sign on his desk, the buck stops here. If something happens in the school, even if I wasn't directly responsible for it or I didn't do it, no, it's my responsibility. I'm responsible for the way people treat each other, for the way our facilities people maintain our building, for the curriculum. Curriculum is owned by the faculty, but I need to be able to say, wait a second, we can support that. We can support that financially versus just, we're going to go off and do anything.
Yeah.
So everything ultimately is that leader's responsibility. I think the question for me is sort of what are the main responsibilities? You might have heard on Friday, I use a lot of sailing metaphors.
Yes.
I like to sail.
Yeah.
So the primary responsibility of the captain of a boat is the health of the vessel and his crew. That's it. And that's what I've always believed, that the most important thing is, first of all, the school. It is the school. It is our reputation. It's what we do. It's, how we're viewed both locally in Rochester as well as internationally. So trying to protect that at all times and trying to do the right thing to advance that. And the most important part of the school are the people at the school. So, I will say I've worked hard to try to to foster a community that is really a community of people who care about each other, who are invested not just in their own little world, but in each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's really one of the things I value at Eastman. I valued it as a student, so all I had to do was keep watering it. I didn't have to plant anything. But, I love how supportive students are of each other. I want our faculty to be supportive of each other. I want our faculty to respect our staff. And, talk all the time about, I want our school not just to feel, but to be a place where every person is welcomed, is safe, is respected, and that this is a place where they can belong. So, I think most of my effort has been I believe in leading by example, try to lead with respect and treat everybody with respect. I've worked hard to try and know everybody, and, I can't know all the students' names. I wish I could. But I try to get to know quite a few of them because they're not just, there's no such thing as the students. They're 900 individuals. Right? How do we get to know what they really want and how can I support them? With faculty, I've had a very simple philosophy that you hire great people. You always hire the very best person, and then you support the heck out of them. Because again, they're coming here because they have aspirations. Right? If you were coming as the clarinet professor, you want to teach your students. There's things you want. There might be things you want to accomplish. My job is to help you do those things, so long as they're not outside of where we're heading as a school.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to make our clarinet studio the best studio it can possibly be. Because that faculty member is doing what he or she wants. They're happy. They're satisfied. Their students are thriving. And at some point, when you hire great people and then they get even better because they grow and people will recruit them.
Mm.
And the only reason a person's going to stay is because they're in an environment they really cherish. They feel like they're well supported.
Yeah.
You know, there's always somebody who could offer a shiny new something.
Mm.
And so, you know, trying to create a culture where people really want to be part of it.
Mm.
It's not to say it's nirvana. It's a community. There are issues. There are always challenges.
Yeah.
But if you've got people invested in each other, odds are there's very little we can't get through together and can't work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you say you want to hire and work with the best people, are there any specific attributes or traits that you are looking for that you could maybe pull out a little more specifically of what that is?
Yeah, I mean that's such an odd thing, isn't it? Because, you know, what does best mean?
Yeah.
And again, it's I think I used to even say the best fit, and that's not quite it either. Because if you just hire people who sort of look like we do, then we never grow. And in fact, we don't grow in diversity, we don't grow in thought, we don't grow in lots of ways.
Mm.
But I think you have to be clear about what we are.
Yeah.
And do you buy into this? So, for instance, with faculty members, potential faculty members who, you know, we're talking to, I try and make it clear that, first of all, this isn't a home base to then go have your career.
Mm.
The expectation is, I mean, we've really tried to hire fabulous artists and scholars, but who are passionate teachers.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we are about higher education. Students are paying a lot of money to come here.
Mm.
So I want people who love teaching and are passionate and committed to their students. That's not to say I don't want them in the world playing. I want them doing those things.
Yeah.
But this is where they come home to, and this is where their first commitment is.
Mm.
So that's not what everybody's looking for, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm looking for. And the second thing that, you know, I've talked very openly about is, yeah, I want you to strive to have the greatest clarinet studio in the world, whatever that is, and I'm going to support you at that. But I want you also to be committed to the school, to the whole of the school, to your colleagues. Even on audition days, when we meet with prospective students and parents, you know, I talk about this, and I read a sentence that I put in appointment letters 20 years ago, which says something to the effect of, this is a full-time position that requires a total commitment to your students, your colleagues, and the school.
Mm.
I want people who buy into that.
Mm.
And if they don't, that's okay. But it's like those conversations we had earlier about making decisions.
Yeah.
You need to know what you want, and does that opportunity align with what you want?
Mm.
And it's the same thing for that faculty member. If they really want to be in a major metropolitan area and doing all kinds of things, this is not the place they should be.
Yeah.
But they want to work with great students and have great alumni
Mm-hmm.
in an environment that is positive and reinforcing as any as I've been in. This is a great place to be.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I would love to hear if you have, maybe off the top of your head, a highlight or two of your time here as dean. And then on the flip side of that, what have been some of the challenges that you've been facing as dean?
There's, you know, things that have been accomplished, and am I proud of them? You know, maybe. One of the big things that I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to lead was the construction of the Eastman East Wing.
Yeah.
And the renovation of Eastman Theater, which has always been a gorgeous hall, but it did not sound great.
Mm.
And to be able to renovate that so that it is really a fantastic concert hall was really rewarding.
Yeah.
But there's something that you could look at that, maybe because it's so tangible that you could feel like, you know, that was an accomplishment.
Yeah.
But it's not the thing that I think gives me the greatest reward. I think
Mm.
it really is when I look at the faculty who've been hired, I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
And that's the next 3 decades of the school.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll tell you 2 things. One definitive event and one general event that I just love about this place. So my favorite moment at Eastman occurs 2 or 3 times a week at about 9:30 or 10 o'clock p.m. And that's when an ensemble finishes performing, especially when they perform in Eastman Theater. And then the ensemble comes out a door at the far east end of the hall.
Yeah.
But all the audience members come down into the hall from the west side, and they all gather there. And as the ensemble comes through, everybody cheers.
Yeah.
Right? Could be the piano concerto soloist, yay! Second violinist, yay! Tuba, yay!
Yeah.
It just is, it says everything about the community. And I just love that moment, and I love that happens.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my favorite performance memory. So this was Tuba Miram.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Tuba Miram is a group of tubists and euphoniums. Not necessarily what one would think of as sort of the top musical ensemble, but this was such a fabulous experience. So I remember there was a senior who was playing the Vaughan Williams Tuba Concerto with the Tuba Miram as the orchestra. Don Harry, the tuba professor, was conducting it. It starts, and the student, she's playing along and doing a marvelous job, and Don Harry stops the ensemble. And you can see she's like, this is my moment. You're stopping this. And he said, something's not right. I'm sorry. Something is not right with your instrument. And so he starts looking at her tuba, and he's checking it out, and he's tapping it. And he looks at the back of the room, and he says, does anybody have a screwdriver? And the student says, yeah, I've got one. And she goes in the back room, and she comes out with a brand new tuba.
Oh my gosh.
So this young girl had never had her own instrument. She was still playing on a school instrument. So all of her classmates raised the money to buy a tuba. They started a year before. They were giving recitals. They were performing. They were doing car washes. And they went and bought this tuba for her. And it actually was the tuba of an alum who had passed away a few years earlier, very tragically. And I just thought, that's the kind of people that I want to be around. And so then went on, now let's play the concerto. It was the worst performance ever because she's bawling her eyes out. She's trying to play. And it was just an incredible moment that I will never forget.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was a really special moment. Yeah.
I imagine that during your time as dean, one of the big challenges was facing COVID. I would love to hear your thoughts on how that experience has shaped and is continuing to shape the future of classical music, but also the future of training in musical institutions and how that's affecting students who are going into music schools today.
Yeah. So I'll come at this from a little bit different angle. One is, COVID was horrendous. It was horrendous for the world. It was terrible. It was also that kind of major event that draws people together.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm very proud of the way we handled things here at Eastman, but we just did what needed to be done, as did everybody else around the world. Right? We didn't do anything none of my colleagues at other schools weren't doing. So there were silver linings in COVID. One was at the university here, the deans were meeting 5 days a week. We typically met once a month.
Yeah.
It drew us together. All the associate deans, all the registrars, it really brought people together. Likewise, I'm meeting with groups of deans around the country weekly. We were talking to each other. How are you handling this? What did you learn? And so, again, it really actually brought people together. There was a greater sense of collaboration and sharing than at any other time. And we've moved away from that again. We've gone back to what was normal.
Yeah.
And that's a little unfortunate because there is something really special about leaning on each other to get through these things. And then I think from a positive standpoint, right, there had already been talk about online instruction, and we were doing some of it. But there is also this thought that you cannot teach music online. Well, we all learned you could.
Mm-hmm.
And some things clearly are not as well. There's, music is about people to people and being in that space. But it's not as though it was impossible. And in fact, there are some things I think people learned could actually be done better.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, how one uses time in class could be used more efficiently, taking advantage of technology, or again, putting the lecture online so the class is more experiential, or whatever that is. So some folks have retained that. A lot of people haven't. They've gone back to, again, the way we did things. And I think that's a little unfortunate, because I think there were some good lessons there. I think also the technology was pretty cumbersome when it started, right? Nobody had ever heard of Zoom before. Yeah. We didn't know how to use it. Well, the technology is just getting better and better. Latency is going away. The ability to teach online is just getting better. And I think that will be a benefit. Here's one benefit that I can think of right now. We have several faculty members now, when they leave town for performance, they still are in touch with their students on Zoom, right? So they keep that connection, even if it's just for a week or two.
Yeah.
And it's not even a makeup lesson. It's just, no, they keep that contact. And that's a real positive. I'll tell you the other thing that I think caused a shift in the world that was really unfortunate, like COVID would have been better if it never happened, right? Many thousands and thousands of people lost their lives in that. Another event that was so unfortunate, but in fact I think ended up being a positive for society, was the events of the summer of 2020. And the unfortunate deaths of some individuals that really brought to the fore the nature of racism in this country. And I think it has changed music and music curriculums in a most positive way. That here at this school, and I think in many schools, we really decided to take a critical look at what is it we're doing. Are we really embracing music? Are we really embracing diversity and ethnicity? And if not, why? And there was no good reason not to. So I'm really pleased today when I look at recital programs, ensemble programs here and elsewhere. There's just a level of diversity that wasn't present 5 years ago. And I think that's a super positive thing. So the trick is, how do we hold on to it and not backslide? Yeah. The way we sort of have with technology. And I think that just takes ongoing effort. Again, the leaders need to continually nurture that so that we don't lose those gains.
Yeah. Just one quick question, if possible, because I know it's a big topic, but when I was here in October for Meliora Weekend, I attended a Q&A panel with the deans, which was fascinating. And you brought up this point about the future of music with AI on the horizon. And I just wondered if you could share any on where your thoughts have come to in that area.
Sure. Well, my first response to AI is it scares me. And it scares me because I don't know about it. Yeah. And again, it's easy to think about what the downsides could be, right? Will it compose music in lieu of humans? Will the music be performed by AI at a level that we don't need humans making music? And, right, it can be very scary. I've heard that for people who have a fear of flying, the best thing they can do is to learn how to fly. And I think we don't have a choice with AI but to learn how to embrace it, to use it as a creative tool. Yeah. We could either react to it, or we can really be thoughtful about how can we use this? How can we use this? There's got to be new sounds. There's got to be new techniques. There are going to be so many new things coming out that we don't know today. But let's get in front of it and start to really educate ourselves and think about it. And let's not be fearful about how it could transform education. Think about, I have a grandson in 3rd grade right now and a granddaughter who's in preschool. So when she goes to college 13 or 14 years from now, it's going to look a lot different. She's
Yeah.
going to grow up in an environment where it's so technological rich. So music and music schools had better think about what that's going to mean and how do we not just respond to it, but grab it and use it as a creative tool.
Yeah.
All that says it sounds good. I don't know how to do that. I'm looking forward to the next person. And again, I've not, technology isn't something that has inspired me or that I've found a natural inclination toward it. I do think the next generations of leaders are going to have to be very comfortable with it. And again, find it that it excites them and it's something they want to be a part of leading.
Yeah.
Because it is definitely going to be a part of the future of music.
As you're preparing to step down and go into retirement, is there anything that you're planning on for your future? What's coming up for you? How are you going to use that time?
Yeah. I don't have definitive plans. I've always been a list person. I have lots of lists.
Yeah.
And I have projects that I want to take on, mostly personal projects, things that I have put off for many years because, as I said, I believe in investing everything in myself, and I did that into this job. So I'm looking forward to taking those on. Professionally, I'm not sure what I may do or not. I know that I've got a sabbatical next year, which I'm really looking forward to. And we've got plans for how we're going to do some travel and some other things. But much of what I want to do during that time is first step away from academia. It's really what I've been doing since kindergarten.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just find out what's life like outside of it. And then determine what I want to do next. Do I want to come back and teach, which I have that opportunity, or be involved in the school in another way? Or maybe there's just something completely different I would like to do.
Yeah.
And I don't know that yet.
Yeah.
But I know music will be part of what I do. I'm looking forward to getting back to playing again and looking forward to getting back to piano again and things that I just really haven't had the time to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because you're a wonderful player and saxophonist, and even during my time here at Eastman, I remember you performing, and I think I see that thread, all the way through from adding on your performance major in your undergraduate degree and pulling that through even now, and for students to see faculty in administration who are still musicians and brilliant musicians. I think to be able just to see that is really cool for musicians and for students. And I'm wondering if you have advice for students who are maybe hadn't thought about going into the administrative side of music, but might think about it, or, now are thinking about it. How could they go about orchestrating their careers to go down that different pathway?
Sure. So I think, again, one has to think about what it is they want to accomplish. I love being a studio professor. I love my students and teaching that. But my impact was really with, 15 to 18 students. But that was a deep impact, right? Because you really get to know those students very well.
Yeah.
But I also experienced by becoming a department chair or an associate dean, the impact can be much greater. And that's a different kind of reward. And that feeds me. Might not for the next person. But if somebody feels like, again, they want to have that bigger impact, leadership is a way to do that.
Yeah.
And it's a really important way to do that.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, music needs passionate, committed, smart, entrepreneurial, creative leaders. We need that. So, again, I think that's one of the things is determine what they want, what an individual wants, and what feeds their sort of creative spirit.
Yeah.
So, I think that's an important element.
Amazing. Well, I always like to end my podcast episodes with a quick rapid fire question and answer section if you're up for it.
Okay, I'll try.
Amazing. Who's your favorite composer?
Oh my gosh.
Today. It can change tomorrow.
It can change at any moment. Well, it depends on so many different kinds of music.
Of
It's
course.
like, what's my favorite food? I don't have one. Who do I love? Let's see. I love Brahms. I love Stravinsky. I love Gershwin and Porter, and anything by Paul McCartney.
Amazing. I love that. Favorite piece of classical music?
It depends on the moment, but
Yeah.
I would go two things that will always move me to tears: Barber's Adagio for strings, Ravel's Pavane for a Dead Princess.
Beautiful. Favorite movie soundtrack?
Out of Africa by John Barry.
Oh, I don't think I've heard that one.
Oh, it's this expansive, beautiful music, and it fits this expansive, beautiful landscape. Once you hear John Barry's music, it's all quite similar in films.
Okay.
But it is perfect for that film.
I'll look that one up. What's a book that you keep coming back to, whether you keep rereading it or it's something that has really stayed with you?
Well, this is more for leadership, and even I've referred to it when I was at a crossroads, you're unsure what to do. Jim Collins' Good to Great is a book written in the 90s. And it's about what separates really good institutions from great institutions, and the kind of leadership that's required to do that.
Okay. Musician you really admire?
Wow.
That's a really hard one for you. I'm sorry.
That's hard. Geez, there's so many. Top of mind, Diana Krall.
Oh.
Because she has this incredible sense of time. She can manipulate time, and it's magical for me. And she again, I love singers who are storytellers.
Yeah.
And she knows how to tell a story.
That's one of my favorite things, when music does that, when it tells a story.
Yeah.
I feel like it engages me in a whole different way. What would you say is the most useful app on your phone?
I just said I'm not that technological.
You can say none if
Windy app.
What is that? Is it to do with sailing?
Yes, it is. So it's more than just the weather. It tells you wind directions and speeds and lots of things.
I love that.
So, yeah.
For any aspiring sailors out there. Perfect. And finally, if there was one resource you could recommend, so it could be anything, a book, movie, podcast, piece of music, anything that you feel would be really beneficial for someone to check out.
Wow. I don't know if this qualifies or not, but this past year has been a bit of thinking back because of moments like this. And
Yes.
And I realized that perhaps more than I did a year ago, how grateful I am for having some amazing mentors. And I think finding those people who are always in your corner, who you could always go to, and sometimes they won't even have advice, but you know they're there, and I think that's been an incredible resource for me.
Yeah. No, and I think you've really pulled that out in your own story, as along the way when you've been sharing your journey of, people who've had a deep impact on you and really helped shape how your course has gone. So I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Could we just end with, if there's one last piece of advice that you would want to leave with listeners and how people can stay connected with you and what you're doing? That would be great.
Well, one last piece of advice. I think, again, think carefully about where one wants to go. I remember some smart person said, there's no dress rehearsal for life. This is it. So think about where you want to go. It's the journey that matters, and try your best to enjoy every single moment of it.
I love that. And if there's a way for people to stay connected with you?
I have an email address that's easily accessible on the Eastman School of Music website.
I'll link it.
Feel free to write to me. And one thing I'm looking forward to is disconnecting from email.
Of course.
But not personal emails, more of the stuff that comes in every day.
And a well-deserved break for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I cannot thank you enough for making the time to come on the podcast and share your story, especially with everything else that you have going on right now. I mean, I'm sure you're always very busy, but I feel like end of year, and especially with all your celebrations and retirement stuff coming at this time in particular, it means a lot to me that you would make the time for me. So thank you so much.
Becca, you are a special person. You are a special student. I'm so excited to see all that you're doing, and it's a real privilege to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot. And I'm really excited to see what comes up for you and to see where you go in this next chapter of your own life. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom and your time. You've been such a generous supporter and guidance to so many people in the Eastman community and beyond. So cannot thank you enough.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Orchestrating Your Career podcast, and a big thank you to Dean Rossi for sharing his time, his story, and his wisdom with us. If you enjoyed this episode, then give this video a like and leave a comment below letting me know what you took away from this interview. If you're listening on Spotify, it would also be a huge help if you could leave the podcast a review. The resources mentioned in this episode and where you can connect with Dean Rossi are all linked below. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms, as well as get more frequent updates on Instagram. To watch videos of all the episodes and get extra behind-the-scenes content, check out the YouTube channel Orchestrating Your Career. Subscribe so you don't miss anything. Share this episode with a musician or anyone else you think might be interested. And look out for new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. Next episode's conversation will be with Dylan Price, a freelance composer working for Hans Zimmer's Bleeding Fingers Music. Stay tuned for his episode. Until then, here's the saxophone performance you've been waiting for. Dean Rossi, take it away.